and welcome to episode 58 of Stand Up with Pete Dominick. This is the Post-Super Tuesday Spectacular. Hello, friends. Today I'll gather analysis from some of the smartest minds in politics. Do you like my patriotic music? Joining me today are Sarah Kendzior, Tim Wise, John Nichols, my big brother Brian, and a guy who's like another big brother, John Fugelsang, and election security expert Jennifer Cohn. I reached out to a wide range of people, and I'm excited that these folks got back to me. All right, enough with that music, really. Seriously, let's get back to my my normal music, shall we? Okay, well, these are the people that I got booked. I reached out to a whole bunch of people, and it's a scheduling nightmare when you're doing as many guests as I did in one day. So these were the folks that I was able to get on the show. Sorry, it's not always the right mix of men and women, black and white, old and young, conservative and liberal. But these are the folks that I got. I'm very excited I got them. I think we still get a wide range of opinions on Super Tuesday here on today's show. Also, very special new feature here. If you are a Patreon subscriber, I am now taking ads from you. Okay, this is how it works. Whether you have your own business or you're selling a product or a company, you can also just mention or plug your favorite book or nonprofit organization. All you have to do is join with a paid subscription at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Let me know what you want me to mention right here at the top of the podcast. Isn't this a unique idea? You pay and you get your stuff plugged. As long as it's not bullets or oil or homeopathic drugs, I'll do my best to promote it. I kid the homeopaths. Come on. All right, go to Patreon. Like Adam S., who subscribes for $10 and says, I've got to plug Noble Pies. Of course, a longtime supporter of my work, Tom and Leslie and their family at Noble Pies in Warwick, New York. Yeah, good one, Adam. The best pies that you can get, noblepies.com. Watch them now on QVC. Follow them on Twitter and order a pie. He says, since they've been around the show a long time, that's my 2 cents. All right, Adam, thank you for your subscription on Patreon. Matt Elliott is a listener and subscriber. He says, I don't have anything to plug personally, but you should definitely plug this book. And even though I doubt many of your listeners are Mitch McConnell fans, but we've got to get rid of that festering turd. The book is Mitch, Please, How Mitch McConnell Sold Out Kentucky and America Too by Matt Jones with Chris Tomlin. Okay, Matt, thank you very much for your Patreon subscription. And Matt subscribes for $5 a month. Matt, I appreciate it. Okay, let's go next to subscriber Derek. He subscribes also $5 a month. He says, hi, Pete, if you're giving out shout outs to supporters, my colleagues and I at the VMI Center for Leadership and Ethics have a fledgling podcast ourselves. Any shout out would be great. It is the Virginia Military Institute VMI Leader Journey Podcast. VMI Leader Journey Podcast. It's really to reach out to our cadets, to bring involvement with the center, but it could be enjoyable to others. Our 4th episode is with Pittsburgh Steelers offensive lineman Alejandro Villanueva. Okay, there you go, Derek. Thanks for your Patreon subscription. Jennifer M., newest Patreon subscriber, I think, says the vegan lady who almost took down Joe Biden has inspired me to plug one of my industry's favorite nonprofit organizations. It's the Foundation for Biomedical Research. That's FBresearch.org. FBresearch.org. Jennifer says they promote the responsible ethical use of animals to advance biomedical research. All right, I'm out of time, but I got to get to the podcast. But for all of the Patreon subscribers, keep it coming. Subscribe at patreon.com. I'll plug whatever product, service, book, nonprofit, other artist that you want right here on the show. And let's get to it. My first guest, she is the host of Gaslit Nation podcast. Support her on Patreon. Sarah Kendzior, who's got a new book coming out as well called Hiding in Plain Sight, available for pre-order now, out everywhere on April 7th. You, of course, have come out, and I don't know why I said of course, but you endorsed Elizabeth Warren, and at this point when this airs, there's rumors that she's, quote, reassessing. She might have already dropped out of the campaign. So I just want to get your reaction on how you're feeling about that, because I, too, am a huge Elizabeth Warren supporter, extremely disappointed that she didn't get more support. What is your take on it?
Yeah, it's a disappointing outcome. And this is the first time I've been this enthusiastic about a presidential candidate ever. So this is a strange feeling. But kind of putting feelings aside, from what I heard, she has not dropped out and hasn't made a decision yet, and her team is evaluating. They put out a statement a couple hours ago. I think at this point it's beneficial in my view if she just stays in through the next debate, because what I liked about Warren is that she was addressing a lot of issues that none of the candidates were looking at that closely. For example, white collar crime, the organized crime elements within the Trump administration and the need to hold them accountable. She was much more explicit about that need than other candidates. She's the only candidate that's laid out a detailed plan about how to battle the coronavirus. And of course, the Trump administration is not doing anything about that. They're just lying and obfuscating and exploiting it. So honestly, I kind of just want to see Warren as a national figure. I want to see what her stances are on these issues. And since the media blacked her out of coverage, I don't think that it's likely I'll see it that way. So I just kind of want to hear her voice for a while. But, in reality, she does not have a path to the nomination.
You say the media kind of blacked her out and didn't give her a fair shot, Elizabeth Warren. How do you quantify that?
They literally omitted her from things like last night when the votes were coming in on television. It listed Bernie, Biden, Bloomberg, and Tulsi, and she wasn't even listed on the screen. In polls, when they would go out and poll people, who are you voting for? They would leave Warren out and again put in candidates like Tom Steyer or Tulsi Gabbard that were, polling very marginally. It was intentional, and it seemed to coincide with her peaking in the polls. I mean, she was very steadily rising and was the front runner for a significant amount of time. And then suddenly, she was just dropped out of the picture. That and a lot of articles came out, especially from the, quote, never Trump Republican camp, slamming Warren, seeing her as a threat. You saw billionaires crying on television that she was the front runner because they would have to, follow her dreaded wealth tax that in reality they would never even notice. I think that corporate-owned media played a big role in shutting her out, because I think while they're also threatened by Bernie Sanders, Warren is the one who I think would more likely succeed in her goals and actually enact these policies, which are going to hit billionaires and CEOs. I don't even want to say it's going to hit them hard, because honestly, the effect for them would be negligible. They would barely notice. This is chump change for them, but it would make an enormous difference in the lives of everyday Americans. But they're that selfish and that greedy that they had to shut her out. And I also think that's why Bloomberg jumped into the race. It was to shut down Warren, and I think, to a lesser degree, to shut down Sanders. He's managed to do that. He succeeded in that. He's out now. And so now we're left with, Sanders and Biden.
You have a piece at the Globe and Mail titled, As Gerontocracy, am I saying that right? As Gerontocracy looms, American democracy may be running out of time. You talk about the age of the candidates, 77-year-old Joe Biden, 78-year-old Bernie Sanders will take on 73-year-old Donald Trump, who's the oldest elected president in U.S. history. I'm glad you wrote this. Why does it matter?
Oh, it matters because, first of all, they might not be able to fulfill a single term and almost definitely will not be able to fulfill 2 terms, not necessarily because of death, but just because of illness, senility, the stress of the job. This is a very stressful job in general, but I cannot think of a point, I guess, beyond like the Civil War, maybe World War II and the Depression, that it is so difficult to be the president of the United States. We've had the government hijacked from within by a mafia syndicate made up of Trump and his cronies and a bunch of transnational actors. We have an economy that's already in trouble and has been steadily in trouble for decades, that's now getting hit because of the coronavirus. We're likely to have a massive recession, if not a depression. We have gutted institutions. Trump and his crew have been cleaning them out. They've been packing the courts. They've been trying to instill a one-party GOP GOP state. And so for any Democrat to actually be able to win the election and then come in, they're up against unbelievable, unprecedented challenges. And I'm not sure that someone in that age group, like late 70s, has the stamina or the capacity to pull that off, because you're going to have to be very, very tough. I mean, even Warren at 70 or 69, I can't remember exactly, but she's kind of pushing it too, especially when you think of 2 terms. And it's a shame because we had this young, diverse slate of, candidates that were running before. And I find it really troubling that all of the candidates who weren't white, all of the candidates who were female, couldn't make it through. And I think that shows the extent of fear and panic in the American electorate. They're only thinking about who can beat Trump. And then their definition of that is, a familiar face, a familiar actor. That's why they're drawn to Joe Biden, I think, less than attributes that he has. But you got to think past that one day. You got to think past the first day of inauguration. Like, how is this person going to respond to, I don't even want to call it GOP obstructionism. I mean, it's going to be probably violence. There's going to be, illegality. It's going to be extreme. And I'm not sure Sanders or Biden is able to do that. And they're going to rely heavily on whoever they pick, for their respective cabinets, whoever wins. And so I'm looking very closely at that. I'm looking at the types of, people in their campaigns, at the types of political actors, that they favor, and just sort of watching as they put that together, because that's going to be much more important for, whoever the nominee is than it has been for prior presidential nominees.
So what is your best reason or analysis as to why women and minorities did not get the support that certainly you and I hope that they would, imagine that they would? You think back to the Women's March, which was, when was that? In 2017, was it?
Well, there's one in January 2017, and then another one in 2018, which was almost as large, but barely got any coverage, which is kind of like feeding into the same problem.
You think of all the energy, though, behind that movement and the support for it, and you think about all of the misogyny from this president, from his own behavior to the people he's appointed, like Justice Kavanaugh. And I wonder if it's a backlash to that, if the energy doesn't transfer into votes. This country is so sexist and so patriarchal, but you thought that was changing, and it is changing in a lot of ways in terms of institutions and behavior and so on, but apparently not enough for a woman to get the nod, or much less. What happened?
It's women and power. They don't want that combination. They don't mind, if people are more comfortable with women as protesters, because there you're on the losing side. You're not actually the person making decisions. You're the person, yelling at the man and showing your displeasure. And I think there's also just a sense of profound disillusionment, because there have been all of these mass protests, and it has been women primarily organizing and participating in them. And that's also true for the blue wave that brought in the Democratic House in 2018, very heavily led by female volunteers. A lot of first-time female politicians were elected into the House. And then there's been very little accountability. It took forever for Pelosi to impeach Trump, despite demands from the Democrats, despite the fact that 85 to 90% of Democrats wanted it the whole time. And he had committed all of these incredible, egregious offenses that he's never been held accountable for. And the same is true of others in the Trump administration. And I think, seeing all of these defeats of women, Christine Blasey Ford or, Marie Yovanovitch, all of these horrible humiliations. Lisa Page is another example. And, and it doesn't really matter whether you like these women or not. The way that they've been presented in public, the sexism, the gendered hatred of them, the way that they've been paraded around, it's disheartening. And I think it has really struck fear into the hearts of women. And I think it's also made men believe, a woman cannot get elected. And of course, Hillary Clinton is another example of that. I mean, there's there's obviously legitimate critiques to be made, of any of these people, but the critiques that were made were often had to do with the individual being a woman. And I think with Warren, the same kind of thing happened, and a lot of the media coverage reflected that, where she would be seen as shrill or hectoring or hysterical or all of these things, for stuff like bringing Bloomberg to task or bringing Chris Matthews to heel.
Right.
Like, they did not like to see actual female power in action, even though Warren honestly is like the most chill of all these candidates. Like, she's very warm. She's kind of, she's friendly, but she's tough underneath. And I think that toughness, it just frightened people. But it is such a shame. Like, electability, quote unquote, is such a terrible self-fulfilling prophecy because it relies entirely on the fear of other people and your assumption about the fear of other people. And it ends up shutting a lot of folks out. And I just hope that doesn't happen on, lower level races as well in the Senate and the House. Like, I hope people vote for who they truly think the best person is, and maybe there's not as much personality politics involved on those kind of races, because it is such a shame that this opportunity was lost with Warren.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. There's a kind of a collective sense of emotional pain that I'm seeing and I'm feeling. I mean, she was my choice for sure, and I've been following her long before she even got into politics. I remember when she was first on The Daily Show, and so I just. Well, let me ask you, speaking of electability, I mean, it's such a weird word, and there's it's so difficult to talk about here in March. And as you mentioned, this pandemic, and we could have a terrible, terrible situation with the economy and so on. But still, a lot of assumptions and predictions. It's a long way away. But looking at Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders, if it does come down to those two, do you have a sense of who has a better shot, or do you think, reasonable people can disagree on who has a better pathway to defeating Donald Trump, given all of their baggage?
I mean, from the start,
And Donald
I thought
Trump.
that pretty much any of the Democratic candidates in a free and fair election could beat Trump, including both Bernie and Biden. What I've always worried about is that it's not going to be a free and fair election due to voter suppression, foreign interference, unsecure machines, or Trump simply refusing to concede. I think that both of the campaigns have made mistakes, and honestly, they could learn from each other. I think that Biden is still clueless about a lot of the main issues that are plaguing America, and especially he's very dismissive of the pain that young people in America are feeling. And of course, Bernie addresses that pain, directly. That's a big part of his campaign platform, with, higher education being free, with relief of debt, with Medicare for all. He's addressing young people, but they're not actually turning out for him. Voter turnout among youth, including for Bernie, was quite low, even though turnout in general was up. And I think that's because he's run a fairly alienating campaign. People like to, kind of laugh at the quote unquote mean tweets that his staff and that, some of his supporters have dropped. But, when people are constantly being harassed or threatened online, I think it impacts their decisions. And I think a lot of people will just, ignore it if they feel that Bernie's, platform is the one that resonates with them. And I don't think Sanders himself has been particularly alienating. I think his critiques of, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, as he calls it, are valid. But when you surround yourself with vicious and cruel people, or at least you seem to countenance their behavior, it makes people wonder, how will you handle power? Who will you put in office around you? Will they abuse power too? And since Sanders is so elderly, I think that question has become foremost in people's minds. Like, what will a Sanders cabinet look like? So if I were him, I would answer that question. And honestly, if I was Joe Biden, I would answer that question too. We have, more of an idea with him because all of these, kind of moderate Democrats came out like a centrist Voltron and endorsed him right before Super Tuesday. But with Sanders, it's a little more enigmatic. And so, seeing the willingness, like, are other Democrats willing to get behind Sanders and serve in that administration? Like, that's another interesting question too.
Is centrist Voltron yours? That's awesome.
I'm not sure.
Oh,
I've been talking about this with so many people that it's possible it's someone else's, so I don't want to take credit. Like, I know the idea floated through my mind, but I don't remember who expressed it first. But that's what
hilarious.
It was. It's one after another, like Pete, Emmy, Beto. I was like, oh my God. But And it worked. It was effective.
Sarah, I appreciate your time. I love your podcast. You and Andrea are awesome. You're two of the best, brightest, most fearless voices in all of independent media. People should support Gaslit Nation on Patreon, and it's got quite an audience over there. And so I appreciate you spending a little time with me. You're very busy. You got a lot going on. So thank you very much for calling me. Let me call you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
All right, that is the powerful, brilliant Sarah Kendzior. Check out that podcast. And now I want to plug another Patreon subscriber who I know and love, Dustin. Really cool guy. Dustin Barnett lives out in California, has an awesome company. If you, your company, or your team are looking to expand the reach of your brand, reach out to Tri-Skill Promo. Show off your brand on products from premium apparel like Patagonia, Lululemon, The North Face, to high-tech like Beats, JBL, or Amazon, and any and everything in between. Visit TriSkillPromo.com. That's TriSkele promo.com. TriSkillPromo.com, or reach out at info@TriSkillPromo.com. There's a link to Dustin's company in the show notes. Dustin is a really cool guy. This is his company, and you can put your logo on these awesome clothing and other product brands. So check that out. Get plugs here. Join the Patreon at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Okay. Tim Wise now joining me. Check him out at Speak Out Now. That's his podcast. He's got a Patreon too. Speak Out with Tim Wise on Twitter at Tim Jacob Wise. I started this conversation by asking Tim if he was surprised by anything that happened on Super Tuesday.
I guess I'm somewhat surprised about a few of the states. Yeah, I didn't really think that Joe Biden was going to do as well as he did in Texas and a few other places. But on the other hand, I'm not surprised that there is a pretty deep division, in particular between, I think it's an age-related division within the black community, which has been misunderstood, and I think it's really important for people, whether they're Bernie supporters or Biden supporters or somewhere in between that, to understand the source of this. I think people underestimate the extent to which older black voters, and by that I just mean, voters over 40, let's say, and certainly older than that, have a deep skepticism about the extent to which white folks are going to get behind in November someone like Bernie Sanders. It's a skepticism that is born of, generations of experience knowing that white folks talk about all the great progressive stuff they like, and then when it comes down to it, when someone reminds them that health care is going to benefit black and brown folks, that college for debt forgiveness is going to benefit black and brown folks, start scapegoating black and brown folks, as we know Trump will do, those white folks then turn around and vote even against programs that would benefit them. So older black folks have got experience and a certain degree of cynicism, and what they're saying is not necessarily that they don't agree with a lot of Bernie Sanders' policies. I think many in the black community who are older do, but that, look, we know white people, basically, and we think at the end of the day that they're not going to rally around this dude who is giving them, quote unquote free shit, as someone, said recently that I heard. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying we better understand that, because I think there are a lot of folks attacking these voters in South Carolina and all throughout the South last night, calling them low information voters, which is incredibly insulting, incredibly racist. Older black voters have usually been the adults in the room, frankly. They know more about this system than most people because they have had to. And so I think this is pointing to, once again, the way that race has shaped people's experiences, and what we need to be able to learn from that, and what Bernie needs to learn from that, is that he has not done a good enough job making the case for not for his ideas per se, but for his electability in November with a lot of those voters.
You pressed record, right?
Yeah.
Great. Just wanted to make sure that was happening on your side.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael Harriot at The Root tweeted this morning, "I know those, quote, old black voters in South Carolina. They're smarter, more informed, and more progressive than any of these motherfuckers denigrating black Southern voters talking about, quote, revolution. None of them are on Twitter." Lots of really important points. The one that you just made, which was nuanced and thoughtful, about old, quote, old black voters. This is a fascinating conversation to try to understand what they think and why they think it. Tell me more, Tim.
Yeah, well, Michael is exactly right, and I think that if you want to make a case for Bernie and you want to make a case for his ideas, it's not that hard to do. Listen, I voted yesterday in the Tennessee primary. I voted for Bernie Sanders, not because he was going to win Tennessee, and not because I'm 100% comfortable with Bernie Sanders or with his hardcore supporters, but because I think it's important in a state that Biden was definitely going to win to have a good showing for a progressive alternative. That was just a strategic vote in my opinion. But the fact that I voted for him doesn't change the fact that I would never, ever question the intelligence of a voter who strategically, especially a black voter who's seen a lot more in the last week to make clear the way this system works than most of us have seen in our lifetimes. I would never question their intelligence or their insights. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of people doing. We're seeing people, and I'm talking about ostensibly liberal people, ostensibly progressive people on liberal and Democratic Party oriented chat boards who are denigrating these folks, attacking them, as they often do. This is the same people that say things like, well, we should just let the South secede again. We should just let the South go. I mean, really, what does the South do for us? Well, I don't know, but 38% of black folks in this country live in the South. So when your precious little revolutionary white ass says we should just let them go and be swallowed up in some new neo-Confederacy, what you're really saying is you don't give a damn about black people. It's incredibly racist. It's incredibly arrogant. And what it really says is we don't have to convince people. All we have to do is convince 18 to 29-year-olds, and there's going to be this youth revolution. Well, look at the turnout yesterday. Everybody that's been promising this, it's not happening. They were like 14% of the voters or something. That's not going to get it done.
The young people.
Mm-hmm.
The young people that we have been waiting for haven't been showing up in the states there anywhere really. I actually don't know the stats about it, but my understanding is it's not nearly what is needed or what has been predicted that Bernie would draw in these primaries. Maybe something changes by October. Right. At this point, if he gets the nomination.
At this point, they're not. Now, obviously, primary, a lot of times they don't turn out in the same ways as they might in November. But look, it's going to take for Bernie Sanders to be able to win, if he is the nominee, he is going to have to get a minimum of 18% of the overall vote to be that 18 to 29-year-old age group. It really needs to be 20% or better. It has, by the way, never been that high. The highest it has ever been was in 2008 with Obama and in 1972, which was the first year that 18-year-olds were allowed to vote. And even then, it only got to 18%. There is no way he wins unless he gets that or better, because that's the only group that he is crushing it with. All the other groups are pretty, evenly split. And the biggest group of voters is still going to be people over the age of 45 with whom Bernie Sanders doesn't do that well. So we can, all the okay boomer memes in the world are not going to change basic math. Math is going to... You tweeted... Yeah, go ahead.
You tweeted, let's be clear, if Bernie loses the nomination, it will not be because they stole it from him. It will be because he failed to convince enough people, especially older black folks, that he could win. If that happens, it's on him. I voted Bernie today, but some folks need to grow up with this conspiracy shit. What are some of the conspiracies or untruths or just way off opinions that the Bernie supporters are getting wrong in your opinion?
The idea that Elizabeth Warren is staying in just to hurt Bernie Sanders. There's an actually really interesting piece over at The Intercept that I read yesterday, which makes the case that actually Elizabeth Warren staying in might have mathematically in certain states not hurt Bernie as much as it would have hurt Biden. And it goes to this long sort of exegetical reason as to why that is. It's worth people reading, I think, or it's people saying, it's Trump saying, and this is the thing that Bernie folks need to be very careful about. And again, like I said, I voted for him. But if you're one of these folks who thinks everybody's out to get Bernie and stop the revolution, and it's like another deep state conspiracy, but this time against your guy, you need to understand this is Trump's line. This is what these far right folks are saying in the hopes that you will stay home in November, in the hopes that they can make you so cynical about this process that you'll stay home, not vote for, let's say if it is Biden, not vote for Biden or whomever, and Trump wins. It is only playing into his hands to believe that there is some deep state conspiracy. The reality is, at this stage of the game, it's voters who are making the decision. Those black women in South Carolina ain't part of the deep state, y'all, right? They're not. And those black folks in all those states yesterday, and not even just black folks in Maine, right? I think Maine and Massachusetts both went for Biden, right? So, I mean, at this point, you've got a lot of states that aren't even that many black folks. People are saying, yeah, I'm just not convinced. If you want to convince them, you still got time between now and the convention, but you got to get out and convince them. And waving your arms and increasing your amplitude and talking about millionaires and billionaires and elites is not going to convince somebody that you can win. That's a discussion that you have to. And by the way, having rallies in Queens with AOC isn't going to convince anyone. Having rallies in Tacoma, having rallies in Denver, having rallies in Austin, going to college towns and progressive havens and having big turnout is not going to convince any of those people in those swing areas and in the other parts of the country that you're electable. You know, go to Harrisburg and have a big ass rally, and then we can talk.
So it's really about winning an election is about being able to inspire and get support from certain groups of people and certain demographics. We talk a lot about that when we talk about campaigns and elections. And there are questions about who can turn out black voters, older black voters, younger people, women. What point do you think is the most important point in terms of demographics, especially when it comes to race or anything else, about how either Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders, or if there's some miracle, Elizabeth Warren, were to which group do they need?
Well, you've got to get all these groups, and this is the thing that I think a lot of folks miss. When it comes to electoral politics is never about getting everything that you want, because we have a 330 million person country with an electorate that generally ranges somewhere between 120 and 140 million people. And even if you want to increase that, hopefully increase the electorate as Bernie wants to do and get 10 or 15 million new people out there, we're still talking about millions of people with lots of different backgrounds and lots of different views. And this country's people range in their views, from people who are definitely to the left, people who are definitely to the right, and they're probably fixed in their views. But you got all these center left to center right folks who vacillate back and forth, and some issues they're progressive, some issues they're more conservative. If you're going to stitch together a winning coalition, you may not like it, but you're going to have to figure out ways to appeal to all of them. And so what drives me nuts is to hear, the hardcore Bernie supporters who say, well, they should have to earn my vote. They need to earn. Okay, yeah, you're right. A candidate should have to earn your vote. But you know what? The person who isn't where you are on the spectrum politically also says they need to earn my vote. Everybody wants the candidate to earn their vote, but how does a candidate earn your vote if the only way you'll vote for them is to agree with them on everything? That nobody can earn your vote that way. That's an impossibility, right? Exactly. So at some point you have to be able to do the best you can, and if you want a revolution, you make it, frankly, not at the ballot box. You make that by pressure tactics and protest tactics and grassroots activism. That's how that kind of change is going to get made. When it comes to election day, it is harm reduction. It is like giving clean needles to addicts in the park. And that's what it needs to be understood as.
So, Tim, just got to ask you about last night. There were some long lines in places like Texas. A lot of people, and hoping to get Ari Berman on with me, pointing to the Voting Rights Act, which a huge part of which was repealed by the Supreme Court years back during the Obama administration. That Supreme Court, unfortunately. What effect has that had on voting? How would you connect the dots between the fact the Supreme Court repealed a huge part, gutted the Voting Rights Act, and the outcome of last night's primaries and what you're concerned about?
Well, Ari's going to be the one to talk to on that, obviously. But I think, I did hear reports that there were a lot of polling places that were closed in Texas, in particular, in black and brown areas and communities, which is obviously concerning because even with the court's decision in the Voting Rights Act that gutted it, they're still not supposed to do that. They're still not supposed to reduce access in such an overt and blatant blatant way. So I certainly hope there's some legal challenges that I'm sure there will be on the ground in Texas and elsewhere where that happened going forward, because there's no question that even small changes in the availability of voting machines, which we've seen before, we saw it in Ohio years ago, we've seen it many places. We've seen voting precincts in places like Alabama, in the Black Belt of Alabama in particular, that were, just sort of shuttered altogether for voter registration, where people weren't able to even go register. They had to drive an hour and a half away to do that. It's going to be a real problem in November. And so I hope what I would like to see is Mike Bloomberg take all this money that he has pissed away trying to run for president on an ego trip, take all this money, of which he still has plenty. God bless him. When you want to do something good with your money, put all that money into ensuring a couple of things. Number one, that everybody who wants to vote in November has a ride to the polls. Number two, that everybody who needs an ID because they live in a state where they're trying to make it harder and harder to vote has whatever ID they need, has 4 copies of them, 15 copies, just in case they challenge the first 14, whatever. Like, spend your money to make sure that whatever the stupid rules are that these folks are imposing, whether it's in North Carolina, whether it's in Texas, whether it's wherever it is, that by God, we're going to jump every hoop you need to jump. We shouldn't have to do it, but by God, we're going to do it. And Mike Bloomberg's money is going to make it possible. If he wants to contribute, he can do that, because the voter suppression in November is going to be one of those things that is only going to be overcome with lawsuits and with money and with turnout. And maybe, that's a way that he can salvage his miserable soul, is by putting, millions of dollars into that.
I love it. Oh, I love it. I love the flourishes. Tim, you want to make any predictions? Is it easy to say, or is it possibly surprising to think that maybe it won't be a protracted, pretty ugly, similar to Bernie versus Hillary back in 16?
I don't know if it'll be that ugly. I do think it's going to go, maybe down to the wire. It's certainly going to go a lot longer. It's not going to be over anytime soon. So I guess we'll see whether, I don't know if it'll be contested at that, if it'll be a brokered convention. I think by the time we get there, maybe we'll know who the nominee is. But I just hope that whatever happens, the ultimate thing now I hope people will do, and I'm going to try to make this turn as well and follow my own advice, because, Twitter is not a medium that brings out the best in us. So I'm going to try to impose this on myself, is I hope that we can all, no matter which side of this we're on, whether we're sort of Bernie partisans or Biden partisans or Warren partisans or whomever, that we can just now start to focus on 2 things. Number one, make the case for your person. Make the case for your person, both their ideas and their electability, without tearing down the opponent, because if you continue to tear down the opponent, and that opponent is the one who wins, you're going to have embittered their your own people and their people, and then they're not going to turn out and vote for that person. Yep. It is happening. And then the second thing is turn your focus on Donald Trump. The goal in November is defeating Trump and Trumpism. It is not destroying the Democratic Party. If you want to destroy the Democratic Party, make that a project for next year, but let's deal with first things first, right? It's sort of, as I've said many times, the country is like a patient bleeding out on the table. We need to do triage, but we got a bunch of folks arguing about long-term care. No, we need to stop the bleeding and apply whatever tourniquet needs to be applied. That means defeating Trump. So by all means, I want Bernie hardcore folks to make the best case they can for their person. I want Warren folks to do the same. I want Biden folks to do the same. I want everybody to be there for their person. But at the end of the day, if the way you do that is by convincing the world that the other person is entirely unacceptable, all you do is improve the likelihood that Donald Trump gets 4 more years, and that's going to be on you if that happens.
Speakoutnow.org. That is Tim Wise. Speakoutnow.org. Go there, support him, sign up to support him on Patreon. Tim, always a pleasure. I appreciate you squeezing me in. I know you're traveling today, giving a talk, and I can't thank you enough for joining me again. Always appreciate it. Definitely check out all of Tim's stuff, his podcast, his Patreon. Follow him on Twitter. Tell him that you heard him here at Tim Jacob Wise, everybody. All right, one more plug for a Patreon subscriber. If you want to get plugs for your product, your service, or for somebody else, including somebody else's Patreon, you can do that right here by signing up with me. Check the links and subscribe as a patron. Dan Clark says on Patreon, Pete, I'd like you to plug Allie Moss's Patreon. Okay, I'd be happy to plug this great singer-songwriter. He says she has the heart and voice of an angel. Well, I'll be the decider of that. Here's a little of Allie Moss's music from her Patreon page.
Cold concrete beneath my back. I lay where I landed.
Oh yeah, she's very good.
Close my eyes and hold.
Thank you for introducing us to Allie Moss's music, Dan. And again, if you want to plug a product, a service, an organization, an artist, another Patreon, do it now by signing up for my patreon.com/PeteDominick, and I will get those plugs out. You can advertise on this show. And now my conversation with writer, journalist, national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine, and author of the new book that's about to drop, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. I called up John Nichols.
John Nichols.
Pete Dominick.
Pete Dominick, what the hell's going on, man?
You sound pretty good. Let's just leave it at this.
All right, baby.
I'm very much trying to just take up a little bit of your time.
That's okay. I'm writing a piece for The Atlantic about how Democrats should talk about socialism.
I can't wait to read that. I'm so into that subject. Can we start there or no?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You can start wherever you want to start, my friend. I'm at your service.
How should Democrats talk about socialism? It's such a good subject.
It is a good subject, my friend. And the fact of the matter is, I got a great quote from former Senator Russ Feingold, really smart guy. And we were talking about, how Democrats should deal with the prospect of Bernie Sanders. And this is at a point when Bernie Sanders was the front runner in the race. I think Super Tuesday has altered that some, but it's apropos to the topics we're dealing with. And Feingold quoted, Mick Mulvaney, the White House chief of staff.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, wonderful man. And he said, I know people are saying, well, how in the world is a socialist going to be elected? And I think we need to go with the wise words of Mick Mulvaney. Get over it. He is a socialist. So what? And the fact of the matter is that Sanders is different than other Democrats. He acknowledges that he's a democratic socialist.
Mm-hmm.
That puts him in a certain place and moves the discussion along in certain ways. But the other fact is that Donald Trump doesn't care whether you acknowledge you're a socialist, whether you say you're whatever. He's going to call you it. And so Democrats have to recognize that even if they don't nominate Bernie Sanders in 2020, as frankly Super Tuesday suggests might be the case,
right?
Trump's still going to call him socialist. Trump. When has Donald Trump ever been bothered by the truth?
No, he'll just call his nicknames are extremely effective, as they would be. By the way, it's so hacky. If I called you Lazy John Nichols, and it took people like, that guy's lazy, even though you're one of the hardest working writers and journalists out there. But it just that's just messaging, and it works for him. And
he's going to love using the word socialist, right? He's going to use it all
Russian
over the place.
Bernie, whatever he does.
Yeah, red. But it's not just Bernie. He's going to do it to Biden. I promise you. Because they're going to say, right, it's like, that's right. Democrats want to fool us by saying they tossed aside Bernie, but let's acknowledge the reality. They let him run. Blah, blah, blah. And so,
so no matter what, he's going to call whoever the candidate is a socialist. So just own it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, he's also going to call all the Republican candidates are going to call every down ballot candidate a socialist, right? They're going to say, well, you're running for Congress. You want to serve with AOC. She's a democratic socialist. They're going to do this. It's going to happen. So then that suddenly get over it thing becomes a whole lot more useful, but it's not the full answer. The full answer is you have to take a lesson from a president who won, a Democratic president who won in the middle of the Red Scare, right? Or at least at the start of it, and then who continued to serve it in the Red Scare. Harry Truman. You know what Harry Truman said?
What's the lesson?
In the early 1950s,
yeah.
He said, every time we've ever come up with a good idea, the Republicans have said it's socialism. They said it about Social Security.
Right.
They said it about, and he run down the list. And he actually went right at it. He went right into it. And this is the bottom line. Democrats don't have to be socialist. They don't have to embrace socialism. They don't have to agree with it. But they do have to know how to talk about it.
Why?
And they have to recognize that Donald Trump's going to call weatherization of windows socialist if he thinks it'll help him.
Which are a pain in the ass to do and a temporary solution. Anyway, you got to take them off at the end of the... So, John, but why can't they just describe what it is without using the word? The word carries with it for a certain generation of Americans, including apparently older black voters, a negative connotation. And why not just describe it and repackage it and call it something new and something different? The Green New Deal seems to work on the issue of climate.
Mm-hmm. You can, but you got to go through, you got to recognize the fight you're in. Okay. I mean, this is the biggest mistake that people make in politics. They don't recognize the fight they're in. And so they come up with all these new names, right? They come up with all these new variations and all these new ideas. And then they go into the debate. And then Donald Trump says, that's socialist, right? And you say, you're stuck right back there. And so remember how I said you have to learn the Truman phrase. The Republicans have always done this. They call any good idea, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interstate highway, which was done by a Republican, socialist. They do. That's what they're going to do. So you have to learn to talk that. And then you have to also borrow a little something from a guy who's not running for president anymore, but had a pretty good line. And that was Pete Buttigieg. And they asked him a year ago, before he kind of went off the rails, when he was sort of this smart, innovative, young candidate, Jake Tapper asked him on a show, he said, what about socialism? What do you think about that? And Buttigieg said, you know what, just asking the question tells me, kind of where you're coming from generationally and stuff like this, because for young people, that's not how they think about it. Young people think, wow, this is our future. We're kind of stuck in this thing. What ideas work? And if an idea works, we're going to be interested in it, whatever label you stick on it. And you learn a couple of these responses, learn it and believe it. And suddenly you're not the victim anymore. You're starting to push these Republicans into the corner of, how many ideas will you reject?
Well, I'm really looking forward to that article in The Atlantic. I think it's a sorely needed article, and I'm glad that John Nichols is writing it for the great magazine. But I've only got a few minutes left. I got to ask you for your take on what happened on Super Tuesday. And I mean, I just think your magazine has endorsed, of course, Bernie Sanders. You support Bernie Sanders, it seems. What's wrong with Joe Biden? I mean, what are in terms of
the magazine is, I'm not making endorsements here. The magazine does, and I respect that. In this conversation, as we're talking, let me just give you at least my clearest sense of where it's at. Okay. Beyond my personal preferences, your personal preferences, or anything like that. There is one scorching word in 2020 for Democrats. I don't care where you live in the country. I don't care, what else is going on. The scorching, great big whomping. Stop. The scorching, great big winning, powerful word is electability. Yeah. That's the word, brother. I mean, people are obsessed with electability. And something happened in a 72-hour period that is a very, very, very big deal. We saw the modern age of media and politics, in full force. Joe Biden, a guy who had been written off politically, right, a week before, wins South Carolina. He didn't just win it. He won it convincingly. And he won it with the votes of a lot of people who were really concerned about electability, who think the 2020 election matters in a fundamental way. And they made their choice. You can agree with it or not, but they made their choice that Joe Biden was the guy. And that gave him a bump. It also weakened other people who were trying to claim his lane. Those other people jumped to support him. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and a former candidate, Beto O'Rourke. In that kind of tiny amount of time, this was amplified into, okay, this is the guy. And it wiped out, frankly, a year of organizing and efforts by Bernie Sanders in a lot of places. Didn't wipe it out. I say maybe that's not the right term, but it overcame it. It overwhelmed it. Right. Biden won places he hadn't even campaigned.
Didn't have offices in, didn't have resources in, and he
hadn't
won those
come
places.
to. Yeah. And so the thing to understand is this. This race is not over. There's still there's a real competition here, and it's going to go forward. But if Bernie Sanders wants to, kind of move forward in this race and do it in a way that kind of re-ups him, he's got to own that electability issue.
How can we have the argument about electability at the beginning of March? You've got a pandemic, you've got the economy. Wake me up in October. Both these guys have great name recognition. They both poll winning against Trump.
Yes.
How can we have this conversation right now?
You just got to get better at it. You got to be the one that when you got to have a download of about 30 seconds that makes people say, oh, I think that's the guy who can do it.
Right.
Because that's what they're obsessed about. And again, you know what the deal is? We always say this about gerrymandering. You say the problem with gerrymandering is that voters aren't picking the politicians. Politicians are picking the voters, right? Well, if we accept that that's something we don't like, then we have to sort of accept that in our broader politics. And that is that you can't tell the voters they're wrong to worry about the things they worry about, right? Or to say, hey, you have to think about it my way. No, they want to hear a discussion about electability. That's a practical, smart, and valid discussion, and you better get good at it, right? Don't get mad at people who worry about Donald Trump getting reelected. Get serious about having that discussion. And one final thing, too. You brought up coronavirus, right? I want to emphasize this is something people are really focused on and talking about. Mm-hmm. I could not believe the last debate. It goes on for like an hour before Mike Bloomberg finally brings it up, right? Coronavirus is something that people are worried about. They're going to the stores and buying masks. They're looking at their 401ks. Yep. This is real stuff. Things like this affect our politics. They make people more cautious and concerned. And they're like, okay, who can win this thing, right? Because I'm now really, really worried that Donald Trump doesn't know how to deal with a threat of a pandemic and an economic downturn.
Right. So, it's a big deal.
Understand it, talk about it, get on top of it, evolve with the moment rather than reject it.
I like it. So well said. John's got 2 pieces up at thenation.com about Super Tuesday. And just real quick, one point you mentioned in the most recent piece is that it's very significant that Joe Biden won North Carolina so handily. Why?
Because North Carolina is a state that Democrats can win in November. It's a classic battleground state where they have, flip back and forth in very close elections for the governorship. You have, Democrats are a real presence there politically. There's an immense number of young people who've moved there. It has a large African-American population that is energized. And Biden did very, very well there. Give him his due and recognize that for Democrats going into 2020 in this 2020 fall race, they've got to look around the country and figure out where are your next states to win? Right. Because, there's always this obsession with Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. And maybe Democrats will win those states back. But they can't risk that. You don't say, okay, we narrowly lost the presidency in 2016. Now we're going to try and figure out how to narrowly win it. No, you start to look at Arizona. You start to look at North Carolina. You look at Georgia. You look at states and say, maybe we can expand our map so that we're not playing on the margins. Right. So that's why North Carolina's a big deal.
John Nichols, I greatly appreciate your time today, spending time with me on my new independent media outlet. You've always been an inspiration and someone I looked up to as a journalist, a great writer. Thank you so much for your time.
I enjoy talking to you, my friend. Keep strong, do good.
I appreciate it, trying. John Nichols of The Nation. Check him out at Nichols Uprising. Get his new book and listen to his podcast as well. Okay, now I reached out to my big brother. He's always got something different to say, something unexpected to say. He's very passionate, he's very opinionated, and I'm really lucky to have him as my older brother and that he is always interested in joining me because he really would rather talk about revolution, but I conned him into talking a little bit about politics, and I'm so glad that I did. My conversation with Dominick. Get his book as well on Amazon. It is titled Present as Prologue, a Gen Zero novella. Here's my conversation with my brother. Okay, so you watched the Returns last night, bro, and what are your thoughts on the outcome of last night's elections in 16 states, Super Tuesday?
Yeah, I think the Biden wave has made itself shown. I think it's almost impossible for Bernie to come away as the nominee now. That bums me out somewhat, but I was supremely bummed anyway because I didn't think any of them were going to beat Trump. So I have not gotten too worked up over this election because I've been counting on, the full 8 from the big T.
The full 8 from the big T. A nightmare. Why do you think? Yeah. Do you think Bernie or Joe Biden has a better shot at beating Trump? And isn't that conversation kind of a dumb one right now, early March?
It's too early to know, but it's also the time to decide. So, you kind of have to.
Good point.
Pick your criteria and then stick with it. One of my criteria was certainly beating Trump. And I've been giving pretty much the whole Democratic slate, like a 1 in 5 chance of beating Trump, given his popularity, given how pumped his people are for him right now. He's at Obama, 2012 levels. Anything could go wrong. The coronavirus stuff could totally make a big difference there, maybe, but I really kind of doubt it. And I very seriously expect we'll just get another round of Trump. So I've been it's been very painful to watch all this anyway, because I don't know that any of it's all that helpful. It's just a bunch of fighting among Democrats. And the more it goes on, the more they hurt their own candidates and eat away at them. And that's been, that's been pretty brutal, but it's a natural part of the process. Like, you can't just watch someone you think is awful go without taking the shots at them that you think need to be heard. I'm going to keep taking shots at Biden. I think he's the worst candidate that was on the slate. I definitely think any of the others, maybe with the exception of Bloomberg, would have stood a better chance. He's so unexciting, and he's really not a smart person, and he's obviously a pathological liar, and that's just going to keep coming out. He's going to lie so many times, so blatantly on the campaign trail. Democrats are going to find themselves exactly in the position of Republicans. They're going to be bending over backwards to sort of rewrite the world and how we understand it around Joe Biden's stupid and ridiculous lies that he will make up, apparently because he doesn't seem to have a grasp of the truth. I'm not even sure.
What lies are there lies, specific things that Joe Biden has said on the campaign trail or at a debate? Or
certainly, several times he said that he got arrested, trying to see Nelson Mandela. Like, what kind of insanity is this, where people can make up whole things and we still think that they have what it takes to be president? Now, I don't know if he's lying or if he just has that poor of a memory, but they both should be utterly disqualifying. The only reason that he's better than Trump in that regard is just that Trump does it more. But this is not a thing that we've had to deal with.
Well, he says he was stopped and detained, but maybe not arrested.
I'm sorry. There's so many things about Biden that he either has some kind of mental challenge that is not his fault, or he's a pathological or like an aggressive liar. I don't know which it is. I can't stand either idea, though.
If he gets the nomination, you still think that everybody should vote for him to make sure that
if you live in a swing state where it matters, I think you should definitely vote for Joe Biden if he's the nominee for sure. He's not nearly as bad as Trump. I just don't think. Here's the thing with Bernie. I think that people are probably right that he has kind of like a maximum capacity of people who will support him in this country. That could very well be true. But he had a phenomenon that none of the other candidates had. I strongly prefer Warren as a person, as a candidate. Like, who would I rather listen to for the next 4 years? Definitely Elizabeth Warren over anybody else in this race. But the fact is that she did not build a phenomenon the way Bernie did. And the other thing is, as I've said before on your show, I don't think there's a significant difference between these candidates such that they would be able to get majorly different things done. Like, I don't think Medicare for all is going to happen. But at least Bernie actually had an argument that he would go out and put pressure on, that he's going to build a different kind of movement and do sort of what Barack Obama did, but then not drop the ball after the inauguration and keep that movement going and keep pressure on in those Senate districts that matter, where the senators have to sweat things out. That's a strategy that I heard that made some sense. I didn't have much confidence in it, but at least it's a story. There is no story for how any of these other candidates are actually going to get things done.
I don't think anybody's going to get, I don't think Obama did anything wrong anymore that he could have done to get, healthcare, anything more robust.
No, wait.
I
mean,
could either.
Well, re-explain to me then what the difference is that I'm saying, because I'm telling you there's a significant difference between building a mass movement during the campaign and then literally not using your mailing list and going out into the field like Trump does now, rallying your supporters in the districts where it matters.
That's not my understanding. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
That's a huge difference.
You're saying that that Obama didn't do that? I don't remember.
Obama definitely didn't do that.
You think Obama didn't do everything he possibly could to get...
I know for a fact that Obama didn't do everything he possibly could. He didn't use the massive mailing list that he built up during the campaign to mobilize people to come out in the streets or at rallies. He didn't do that. He didn't try to do it. This isn't controversial. This wasn't a thing he tried to do.
I think it's pretty controversial, but let's move on because I want to ask you.
Then you just send me links to the rallies and things that he did, and then you'll be able to prove that he did it. I just don't understand why you're arguing.
I think he put all the pressure he could on every single senator. I think they did. I don't think there's anything that they did not do, but maybe my recollection...
I literally just said he didn't go out into the field in those districts and rally them. I think he did not.
I think let's just agree to disagree. We'll look it up and we can exchange facts later, because I want to ask you what you think that the difference was, what changed or what gave the momentum to Joe Biden. I was talking to Tim Wise earlier, and there's a lot of really interesting discussions in terms of the generational difference, specifically of black voters, specifically what happened in South Carolina. What do you attribute I 100%
think that the older generations hate the younger generations and are trying to steal their future.
In general?
That's everything here. Yeah, I don't think it's black and white. Old people don't give a fuck about young people's futures. And young people are desperate for something different because we are the United States government and our economy are a locomotive heading toward pure doom. And young people are thinking, hey, anything but that.
What do you say then to the low voter turnout? What is it with the younger demographic? This is not new, right? Like, why is it that, if they don't care about young people, that's one thing, and we could talk about that and unpack that. But why don't young people turn out, and why didn't more of them turn out for Bernie than they did last time?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the paradox right there. I'm not sure that enough young people are active and care about the, or believe in the system or whatever. But these are two actually fairly different things, right? Because older people feel validated as voters, and then they actively go out and choose to do damage to future generations. Whereas young people, are only a subset of them are ever going to be active, maybe. This is a thing for sociologists to analyze for sure, but it's not a pat answer. But I don't think it's necessarily race-based. I just think it's older folks being uncomfortable with a different kind of future. They're certainly uncomfortable, with their taxes going up, that kind of thing. We know that. And I think that they're uncomfortable with sharing. I just don't think Americans are sharers, and I don't think that they believe that they should be taxed more to give to other people, including most Democrats. So, I just don't think that part's super complicated, but I think the part about why young people don't come out, it could be that they know what I know, which is that it's not going to make any difference, right? In which case, this isn't also that big of a deal because we'll get Biden just like we were always going to get some milquetoast Democrat, and then he'll lose. What do you mean and then it won't matter?
Well, I mean, there's no guarantee. You agree that that reasonable people can disagree on who, you already said that. I mean, Biden could very well win in October. You agree to that? You say he can win.
I think he has like a 1 in 5 chance of winning in November, I believe, when the election will
forgive me.
People want to vote early and it's legal.
But there is a massive difference. It does mean something if a Biden gets elected. It meant something that Obama got elected.
No, sorry. I wasn't including, I was saying I don't think he will, but if he does, it would be, look, I'll tell you what, I don't think it's a massive difference in 10 years. I think we are all fully screwed in 10 years if we don't change course. And I don't think Biden versus Trump will matter. However, that's 10 years. And I do think that would make a significant difference, especially for marginalized people, if we don't have someone who's aggressively going after them. But, I retweeted somebody saying, watch for the day after the election. If Biden were to somehow beat Trump, immediately Democrats will be making excuses for why we have to keep children in cages at the border and a whole bunch of other policies that he won't reverse. We do not have a tradition in this country of Democrats coming in and turning things back around after Republicans make a massive criminals. Or certainly holding any of them responsible.
Right.
Yeah. And it would almost be unfair to hold Trump responsible, given that Bush wasn't held responsible. Presidents expect that they are kings and that when they leave, they aren't held responsible. This is my constant refrain on your show, but it is the number one thing I've noticed about politics that doesn't get said enough. If we don't hold people accountable, then the next one has no reason to expect that they'll be held accountable, and they will act like outright criminals.
Right. Well, I mean, that's why it's so enraging when it's one thing to not put someone in jail. It's another thing to pass regulations and laws to change the situation so that they can't break them again, such as the financial, regulations, the Dodd-Frank financial regulations, or ending torture.
True also.
I mean, those people, those banksters should have gone to prison, and everybody who committed torture should have gone to prison. And
that's right.
And they didn't, but at least they made new laws, which have since been obviously repealed and destroyed, so that we can be right back there. How concerned are you about voter suppression and what we're seeing in these long polling lines?
Huge reason why. Yeah, and I need to be clear. I don't know. Most people pick a factor or something of why they think Hillary lost last time, or why the Democrats will lose or win this time, or whatever it is. But I think it's a huge collection of factors. The Electoral College is the biggest disgrace that we have. It is so ridiculous that I will not vote for president in New York State since it doesn't get counted. I'm not going to endure the humiliation of voting for an absolute idiot like Biden, since they're literally not going to count my vote. I will vote down ballot. I show up and I try to put my vote in where it makes a difference. But the Electoral College is ridiculous. Voter suppression, the number of polling places.
Can you just give a succinct reason as to, I got to get a better talking point down as to explain how horribly unjust and I think racist the Electoral College is. What is your best, 30 seconds?
Yeah, it's racist in that it's rooted in the original, breakdown, the original system for slavery, but it's still racist in that it strongly favors rural and underpopulated states. It's just really a big slant to the Republicans, the way it works. It also causes this really perverse way of having to, candidates ignoring whole states and stuff when they campaign. But it also causes voters to feel that way. I don't know how big that phenomenon is. I don't know how many of the 50% of people who don't vote would cite that, the Electoral College. But if you think about it for 1 minute, it can't feel good to vote in a state that it's all or nothing for your state, and they don't count your individual votes once the margin is there. So that to me is just incredibly disenfranchising in the first place for president. I also wish that we recognize the president is where your vote would count the least anyway, and down the ballot your vote makes such a much bigger difference. But you asked about voter suppression. I think that's at least as big at this point. It is a major industry for the Republicans. Yeah, I'm terrified that they're going to steal the election. I'm not saying that Joe Biden couldn't win the popular vote. I'm saying he won't win the election.
Because he won't win the Electoral College. He won't
win the Electoral College. Yeah, and that's all that matters. It's a winner-take-all world. It's brutal and dumb.
Can you, I'm putting you on the spot. I know you're not a political scientist crunching data, but is there any way for you to look at when you say that you think, Trump is likely to win or has a, what'd you say, over 50% chance of winning, 75% chance of winning, I think it's 80. What is the coalition of voters? I mean, how is that? Who are they?
I think that it's this thing where Republicans look. I'm just going to say it. I don't have any of these feels that we're supposed to have about Trump and Republican voters. I think they're absolutely deplorables. If you didn't vote for Trump because you're a disgusting racist, you voted for Trump despite the fact that he's a disgusting racist. And if you still support him, it's definitely despite the fact that he is actively engaged in active structural racism at the highest levels. So I have no sympathy for people who think that they're voting their economic interest or whatever. We don't see black people coming out in droves, even though we know that black folks have are at least as desperate as Trump voters are, and more so on average. They didn't come out thinking that Trump is going to help them economically. That's not why people vote for Trump. I find that really silly and pathetic. I just can't get on board with that. So I think it's partly just that. Oh God, the dog's going to crazy.
Well, the dog seems to disagree.
Yeah, the dogs disagree.
All right, I had to end it there because the dogs kept going, and he gave me well over 15 minutes. I appreciate that. Check him out on Twitter, @BrianDominick, and go get his book as well, Present as Prologue, Gen Zero Novella. Okay, here's my pseudo big brother conversation with the brilliant, the hilarious, the beautiful John Fugelsang, whose show is on SiriusXM still, 9 to midnight Eastern. That's SiriusXM Progress Channel. We had a great conversation. Here it is for the post Super Tuesday Spectacular right here on Stand Up.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
So I'm amazed at how busy you are. You're on TV all the time, and Jesus, it's very inspiring. The Katie Couric thing was great.
Thank you. Thank you. We should talk about that another time. John Fugelsang, thank you for talking to me about Super Tuesday. I want to get all your reactions. Hi.
What a pleasure, Pete. I know Super Tuesday is a very special day for you. I think it's become so commercialized in recent years. There's all this pressure to party and drink on Super Tuesday.
Yes.
And I'm glad and honored to be part of a discussion about the true meaning of Super Tuesday.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page.
Definitely.
So your show airs 9 to midnight on SiriusXM Progress. It must have been an interesting time to be on the air. Were you taking calls from people reacting to the results?
Yeah, we tried to make it like I sort of build the show. We didn't book any, journalist guests like we usually do or any celebrities or anything. We just made it like a live exit poll, and we invited people to call all night about who they'd voted for from the 14 states. I was hoping for some American Samoa, didn't get any calls. And then we also just said, if you weren't in a state that voted, how would you have voted, and where do you think this is going? It was a really remarkable night, and it seems like 1 year into this, we're exactly where we started.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. How divided do you think the progressive movement is right now? Liberals, Democrats, I don't even know what label you want to call it. People who are, let's call people who are scared of or very anti-Donald Trump, want to see him gone. We all are getting so worked up that this candidate is more electable than that candidate. And how would you frame it right now? You host a show every night talking to progressive-minded people.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ways to look at it. And I'm sure many of your more learned experts than me have talked about, some of the obvious points. Look, it's amazing looking at how well Biden did in the southern states. And both of these candidates have a lot to feel good about and a bit to feel concerned about. All we know after last night is that Bernie Sanders will not be dominating this race, but he will be competitive in this race, and it could go to either one of them. It could go to a split convention, and then God knows what'll happen. I want to say at the outset, I apply the same rule to Bernie Sanders that I applied to Jesus and Jodie Foster, which is I don't blame any of them for what their crazy fans do. Now, African-American Democratic voters, it's interesting seeing the media talk about them like they're this big monolith that all think the same way. But there is one way that African-American Democratic Party voters consistently go. They are always, in my opinion, extremely pragmatic. And I think when there was a couple of weeks ago when it looked like Mike Bloomberg might be able to buy his way into this, a lot of us had the sensation of what African-Americans have had their whole lives. Oh my God, who's the least racist of these two white men I should vote for, Trump or Bloomberg? And look, Bloomberg, I made a rule when this whole campaign began. I wasn't going to endorse anyone. I would be fair and biased, and I wasn't going to hate anybody. And I make fun of some of them, but I don't hate any of them. I'm over the ageism. I think it's really not liberal and really tacky. And liberals did that with McCain and Bob Dole, and I think it's hacky. But like Bloomberg, I'll give him some praise. He got into this race because he didn't believe there was someone there strong enough to beat Trump. And when he jumped out, that was the reason he gave, that Joe Biden is strong enough to beat Trump. Bloomberg is already weakened Trump. He's going to spend tons of money first to make sure that Bernie Sanders doesn't win, and then to make sure that Donald Trump loses.
Right.
If it goes to a brokered convention, as well as me, Bloomberg could show up with several suitcases of cash and say, okay, Tom Perez, here's your Senate. Give me the nomination. We've heard rumors they're looking at, Sherrod Brown. It could go really, really sideways if one of these candidates gets there without the requisite number of delegates and the candidate with the most delegates doesn't get the nomination. In 2004, I keep comparing this to like 2012 because back then every Republican got to be the front runner for a week.
Yeah.
But time and again, Pete, this looks so much like 2004 to me. I don't say that to be bleak. I think the outcome could be different. But in 2004, we had, the millionaire at birth. In that case, it was the incompetent businessman who couldn't find oil in Texas. We have the guy who couldn't run a casino in Atlantic City, who had supported the Vietnam War but dodged it. This guy that hardworking conservatives are crazy to vote for, and they get in losing the popular vote, and they do unspeakably crappy things. In Bush's case, there was of course, the war in Iraq. In Trump's case, my God, the tariff war, we could go all day.
Yeah.
But he's the first president to run after being impeached. So a very wounded incumbent who's not popular and never won the popular vote in the first place. And it looks like a slam dunk. And in 2004, around this time, there was a popular meme that said, dated Dean, married Kerry. In other words, people who flirted with Howard Dean, who was talking about universal health care in a much more populist, robust, progressive answer than John Kerry, who was the steady, consistent, moderate. Back then, there was one event where they all had to speak, and Howard Dean took the stage and said, I'm here to represent the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. Later in the evening, John Kerry took the stage and said, I'm here to represent the electable wing of the Democratic Party. Regardless of how that played out, we're seeing the same exact dynamic here. It is a two-person race. Fascinating that, like, Biden overtook Sanders in Texas, which definitely moved him forward. Winning California, though, it's rare you'll have a candidate win California and still people say, well, they lost big. It's going to be interesting for Sanders because in the future primary days towards the West, he will do better than the South. He's already won Utah, Nevada, California. The South likes the iconoclastic nature of Sanders. But Biden has shown that he can put together a coalition last minute with no money. And endorsements don't mean a lot. But Jim Clyburn's endorsement and the way he gave it in South Carolina is probably the most influential endorsement of a politician I've ever seen.
He gets a lot of credit. You're right about that in terms of endorsements. I mean, Kevin Costner endorsed Pete Buttigieg. I think it helped him in Iowa.
So did De Niro. Yeah. Right? I mean, Beyonce and Jay-Z endorsed Hillary. Howard Stern and George H.W. Bush Sr. I mean, and Robert De Niro, the toughest guys in the world.
Who was it? Tim Robinson, I think it was. Duncan, one of the San Antonio Spurs, endorsed Bloomberg. Anyway, endorsements don't matter much. John, you said that, but this one did maybe. You said that
Tim Clyburn, absolutely. 47% said the Clyburn endorsement was a major factor in their choice to go with Biden last minute.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
That's unheard of.
You said Trump, is wounded. He was the first president to get impeached. It's going to have to run again, and he's not very popular and so on. But I think while those things are true, he's super popular with his supporters with the Republican Party. He's as popular with his supporters as Obama was with his and many other, politicians throughout the world, it should be mentioned in history.
Oh, even more so.
Pretty bad.
Rabid support.
So these people are so excited to vote for him again. And I'm not sure that's the big concern, that there's going to be a lack of excitement and enthusiasm with either Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. What do you think?
Well, let's get honest about this. Okay, a couple points of this, because you make a good point. If the entire Democratic Party coalesces around either one of these two men and enthusiastically supports them, then you'll see it happen. Because here's the deal. Even if it's Bloomberg at the end, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 139 years old. Okay, that's all you need to know. This is really, really about the Supreme Court. The next president may appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. If Trump does that, he's going to get to Scott Baio at some point. So,
yeah, but even that
climate change, climate change as well. Okay, but here's my point. Donald Trump didn't win in 2016. Hillary Clinton got more votes, but she didn't win. Apathy got 46%.
Yeah.
They split 27% apiece. Donald Trump is not going to be running against someone who has the highest unfavorables in the history of the Democratic Party in presidential races. And he's going to have to find new, and again, I'm not saying
he's done with them during the campaign. By the time he's done with them, throughout the campaign, bashing them, their unfavorables are going to be pretty high when everybody thinks they're communists and
right. But here's the deal. We know how he's going to smear them both. Okay. And we've already got a big preview of how he would smear them both. And it looks like it's going to be Biden.
And crazy.
God knows Trump and Putin and all the right wingers wanted it to be Bernie because they thought he was so much easier to beat.
Right.
I think that's very naive, to tell you the truth, because I think Bernie Sanders could beat him at least. I mean, if either of them has the support of the majority of voters, they will win. And the deal with Trump is, yes, the base is rabid, but unlike Bernie, Trump really does have a ceiling. He's got that 27 to 38 to 40%, no doubt. 46% stayed home last time. If those people show up to vote, Democrats don't need to try to convert Trump voters. They need to try to get the people who don't believe in the system and stayed home last time. That's why Senator Sanders' message is every bit, to me, as competitive as Biden's. We also know, there's a double standard here. Every time Joe Biden has a gaffe, it gets treated with more harshness in the media culture than every 10 Trump lies. We are numb to Trump lies, and we fetishize Biden gaffes. So, they're both going to have the deck stacked against them, because at the end of the day, journalists might support a more progressive president, but the people who own these journalists, who write their checks, they like their tax cut and they like their ratings. The real collusion is Donald Trump and the media system, the clicks, the eyeballs, the ratings. That's what we got to watch out for.
What do you think is the kind of the worst type of media, the most, the kind of media that does the most disservice?
Oh, I mean, it's right-wing media that's designed, rich people pay Fox people to make middle-class people blame poor people. That's how it works. And, what has Sean Hannity been right about? What has the Republican Party done really for non-millionaires since Nixon and the Earned Income Tax Credit? Serious question. Bush Sr. signed the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's great. But really, like a little piddly tax cut, when have they done anything just for non-millionaires when they weren't millionaires, a bigger slice of the pie at the same time?
Yeah.
So, for me, Mike Bloomberg, if he wants to show he's a patriot, he can buy Fox News. He can buy Fox News and still have over $55 billion in his bank account. So seriously, people could do this right now. Donald Trump is going to buy OAN News. His people have already approached them. The Wall Street Journal reported it. He's going to rename it Trump News Network. He's got his parachute for when he leaves. So the Democrats have to fight really hard. And if it's Biden, then they got to pray that Biden campaigns as well as he's campaigned the last week and not the way he campaigned the previous 50 weeks.
Yeah. It's
Biden hustled. He had the best debate performance, and then he went on every TV show. Biden has done he can't afford TV commercials, so he's done every local cable show and TV show, and it really, really helped.
And you're about to see a big change, but the candidate himself, as he has messed up really cringy moments, and people are all concerned about his cognitive abilities and his acuity and all that. I mean, do you not share that concern about Joe Biden?
That's why I began this with talking about the Howard Dean, John Kerry debate, because John Kerry is a very fine man and would have been a good president. But John Kerry, I represent the electable wing of the Democratic Party. He lost to the draft dodger. Howard Dean, I will still maintain, would have kicked Bush's ass, but he turned against him early with that scream thing. And he shot his mouth off about breaking up all the giant media monopolies, and that was the end of his campaign. But I'm really worried, because when we see the Democratic Party going for the less bold choice, what always happens? What always happens, from Dukakis to Bill Clinton, yes, but let's be honest, Bill Clinton got in there. In my lifetime, Democrats only get the White House when a Republican has majorly screwed up. Watergate gave us Carter, 12 years of trickle-down failing gave us Clinton, and the worst president of my lifetime, which is still W. On paper, he is. That gave us Obama. My biggest fear about Hillary was, but we haven't had a Republican crash the economy yet. How can we elect a Democrat? It's never happened in my lifetime, and it hasn't happened yet. And I'm not praying for an economic downturn. I don't want coronavirus to help Caligula Kardashian, but it will take a lot of enthusiasm. And I'm telling you, man, both sides have a real problem. Joe Biden does not take Bernie Sanders supporters seriously, and Bernie Sanders is not taking the moderates seriously. And all of these sides and their supporters will need the other side to form a winning coalition after one of them gets the nomination. Bernie needs to refocus and start selling his message to the moderates. It would be very, very easy for him to do. But instead, I fear we're going to see a slugfest for the next several months. We're going to hear every shitty thing they've ever done in their voting record for decades. I'd like to believe they'll go positive as possible against each other, and they'll follow each slam with a compliment, but they've both gotten a lot more brutal in the last few days. They're the only two who have a path to a majority of delegates. I'm glad Warren is staying in for a variety of reasons, But at this point, it's still only 1/3 of the delegates so far. It's a long way to go.
Why are you glad Warren's staying in?
Well, for one, I think that she has been really, really unfairly targeted for many reasons by the media. I think that when Sanders had the heart attack, they all wrote him off. And the scrutiny directed at her healthcare plan was not directed at any other candidate's plans for anything. The way they hounded her to account for every nickel in a way every candidate runs on a healthcare plan. I've never, not for Obama, not for Clinton, I've never seen the scrutiny in that early in a campaign. And I think she made some serious missteps before Iowa, but I'm glad she's still in the race because there needs to be a woman's voice on that stage. She's an important public servant. She deserves to stay in that race. She has enough money to stay in for a few more months. And I think now when it's down to only 3 people on stage, I mean, maybe Tulsi will be in a debate. She got a delegate, but I think it's just going to be 3 people. And millions upon millions who haven't paid attention yet are going to start watching these things. The ratings are just getting huge. They just began doing this on network. We've been watching because we're nerds for the last year, but it's going to be important to have Elizabeth Warren on stage to present an alternative to these 2 old white guys, especially if we make it all the way to a brokered convention, because at least one of them will be on a ticket, but the voters may not get to pick this time. And it could be crazy, and it could rupture and fracture this party for a generation.
Well, yeah, you're doing your best hosting your radio show with that progressive audience there to, prevent that fracture or rupture.
I mean, it's hate, Pete. It's hate. I get hate from Bernie people every day, and from Biden people every day, and from Trump people. And it's like, I get hate from Bernie. And I supported Bernie in 2016. And then when he told me to vote Hillary, I voted Hillary. And the hate I get from certain male Bernie supporters because I voted Hillary. And I say to them all, why don't you direct your hate at Bernie? He did 40 events for her. He told me to vote. And, it's not the Bernie bros. It's the Bernie supremacists. The Bernie supremacists are the problem. And I love Bernie. And again, I think either of these men with Tourette's on fire would be a better president than Trump. But and I think a lot of the Bernie bros are trolls and bots. I really do, because you don't see these guys showing up at Biden events or Warren events heckling. They're only online. They're cowards. So I don't really know how the Bernie bro thing translates into real time. But there's enough people I know that I really know are actual carbon-based humans who have just, and I have these debates with them saying, how does hating Joe Biden, how does hating Mayor Pete, how does that defeat Trump? How does that help you build the coalition you are going to need?
Yeah, all good points. John Fugelsang on Twitter. Listen to him every night, 9 p.m. East to midnight, SiriusXM Progress 127. Listen to his podcast, Sanity Cast, and thank you for talking to me. I love you. Thanks, pal.
Pete, I love what you do. Let me ask you, I know your listeners have already heard your takes, but what are you taking away from this? Are you optimistic about it? I still think what I thought yesterday, this could still go really good or really bad for the Democratic Party.
I'm pretty optimistic. I'm trying not to, I'm getting a sense of everybody's takes here on this special episode to gather what I think, but haven't said it much, but I'll be succinct, which is, I think this conversation is important and it's interesting when we're going through the primaries, but I think you mentioned this, what matters is where the economy is, where the pandemic is in October. And those things will matter a lot. And obviously, if Joe Biden has a stroke or a health issue with Bernie Sanders, that would matter.
Or if Trump has a stroke, yeah.
He seems the healthiest out of all of them, to be honest with you. But I guess he doesn't always, seem totally plugged in at certain speeches and so on. He's a little Adderall.
Well, it's reached a point now where finally, after 4 years, like every time he lies about coronavirus, the stock market tanks. And, I don't think gas prices are going to go up. Thanks, Obama. Yeah. But I do think that what happens if things start doubling in price at Walmart? Yeah. There are factors still that could come into play here. Yeah.
And that's what I think matters a lot. But I also think that, I always look at the Electoral College, and obviously I got it wrong like everybody else did. We were together the election night 2016. But I look at where those states are polling, not national polls, and you look at the Electoral College, and I think that Joe Biden, I actually right now feel like Biden will probably have a better chance because people, unfortunately, just feel safer with him. But, you made some really good points here, and so many other people have as well. I have no idea, but I think people were going to hopefully coalesce around whoever is the nominee, because we just can't possibly imagine 4 more years of the madness and the fear and the panic.
I think you're right. And I do want to say 2 things. I do believe that Donald Trump, a second term would be the worst thing that could ever happen to him. Next to having a stroke, a second term would be the worst thing that ever happened to Donald Trump. He would leave office more despised than Bush was when Bush left office. I'll predict that right now. At the same time, I think it's a very safe bet that Paul Begale is right, and that the night the Democrats announce their nominee, Donald Trump will announce that he is appointing Nikki Haley as his new vice president to steal their thunder. And he will do that to avoid losing 5% of the Republican female base in swing states. And it's something that the Democrats should be very, very prepared to have.
We will cross that bridge, the Haley Bridge, when we come to it. John, thank you for talking to me. I know you got to get going. I appreciate your time, pal.
Pete, it's always a pleasure. Thank you. I love your podcast, and thanks for having me.
Always. All right, go follow John right now on Twitter if you're not already, and Instagram at John Fugelsang. Listen to him on SiriusXM every single weekday, 9 to midnight East. That's channel 127. Okay, now my final guest of the post-Super Tuesday Spectacular is Jennifer Cohn at Jenny Cohn, COHN1, at Jenny Cohn 1 on Twitter. She is an election security expert. She is a lawyer. She is following closely what is happening with the polls generally and on Super Tuesday. Here is my first conversation, and hopefully first of many more, with Jenny Cohn, my last guest on the post-Super Tuesday Spectacular. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to talk specifically about what happened on Super Tuesday, but more generally, I want to talk about your work. I think your work is really important. I want people to support it. How did you get into this election integrity space? What is it?
Well, after the 2016 election, I was concerned about the voting equipment, and someone on social media asked if there was anyone available to research the voting machines. And I knew I had the research skills based on my long career as an attorney, so I did that. And it was not an area I had previously been particularly interested in, but when I saw a great difference between what election officials were telling us about how easy or not easy it is to hack our election system and what the actual election security experts were saying, I became really concerned. And then from there, I wanted to see who owned the voting machine companies. I was trying to comfort myself that, at least we must have responsible people behind these voting machine vendors. And I ran into information there that got me even more concerned. And it just sort of became this weird hobby. And I knew that other people that I would, other attorneys that I would hang out with or that I would come into contact with, including my husband and all of his friends, I knew that none of them had any idea how bad the situation was with our voting system. And I thought more people should know so we can fix it.
So, and you've talked to and done a tremendous amount of research. I love your articles at New York Review of Books, but you've talked to all the leading election security experts. And before we get to kind of what's wrong with the machines and the companies that own them and all the questions about that, it seems like the consensus is that hand-marked paper ballots should be the primary voting system for most of us.
It is approaching a consensus on that. I would say that the vast majority of leading election security experts recommend hand-marked paper ballots counted on scanners or else by hand.
Doesn't the hand-marked ballots, don't they make things more efficient in terms of the voting process? You could literally hand everybody a ballot that's in line as opposed to waiting in line for a machine or a touch screen and then to scan it. Although on the flip side, you have to hand count them as well because they're hand done, right? What is the most efficient way, and is that way also most accurate when it comes time to counting those ballots?
Well, with the traditional hand-marked paper ballots where you fill in the bubbles, they can be counted on scanners. And the nice thing about the scanners is that they can also tell you if you've made enough of a stray mark on that hand-marked ballot to, confuse things. The scanner can tell you that, and then you can go back and spoil your ballot and start again. So there's sort of two competing issues. There is, several: efficiency, convenience, and security, and they don't always line up. So I would say that certainly most election security experts have been recommending hand-marked paper ballots and scanners. There are a number of election security advocates who would prefer to see hand counting. That's not really on the table at the moment. At the moment, what election officials seem to be doing, and quite alarmingly so, in about 30% of the jurisdictions, is not just using the scanners, but doubling up by getting rid of the hand-marked paper ballots and using a touchscreen computer as a hackable electronic pen to mark your ballot for you with a machine-marked paper ballot. So if you want to avoid that, which most experts say that we should, you need to now specify hand-marked paper ballots.
Right.
You have to have that hand-marked prefix.
And how much evidence do we have that there has been any hijinks with the actual, the touchscreens, the electric voting machines? Where has that happened, and how much evidence of it? How much concern do you have over what's happened in the past and what could happen in the future?
So evidence is a word that I really try to never, ever use when I talk about past elections and red flags. That's the phrase that I'd like to prefer to use, is red flags, because evidence sort of has a legal meaning, and even within the legal meaning, there are nuances to it, and you just get into arguments with people over whether things like exit poll deviations are evidence, or the fact that a convicted embezzler was, this majority shareholder of one of America's largest vendors. Is that evidence of fraud? It's probably not, but it's certainly a red flag. So I am very concerned that there may have been shenanigans in previous elections. And in fact, one of the largest red flags is that we have an election system that doesn't let us really know the answer. It doesn't let us get that sort of what you'd consider direct firsthand proof, because experts say that the only way to know if an electronic voting system of any sort has been hacked is to compare a software independent record of voter intent, which would be a traditional hand-marked paper ballot, and compare that total. So, manually
Right,
total
I
that
see.
up and compare it to the electronic total. And we don't really do that for the most part in the US. So if for the most part we have faith-based voting, even when we get that sort of first step of the hand-marked paper ballot, where in theory you can confirm the legitimacy of an electronic outcome, we tend to not do that actual confirmation. We leave it to faith. Hopes and prayers.
Hopes and prayers, thoughts and prayers.
It's very
That's great.
disturbing.
That's
Yeah,
great.
It's very disturbing.
All right, let's talk about, in terms of specifics with Super Tuesday, we got to talk about LA County, which I think is where you live, also Texas, and an update on the voting system situation in Georgia. What do we need to know about what happened in LA County? What do we know right now, 2 days later or 1 day later?
Well, first of all, I don't live in LA County. I just, I keep an eye on the situation with the voting equipment nationally, and LA County is a really big deal for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of Democrats have been promoting the system that LA County debuted really yesterday. And they've been promoting it with the idea that this could be a model to sort of spread throughout the country after the 2020 election. They have, I guess LA County has a deal with the vendor whose name is Smartmatic, that it's exclusive to LA County. They get to keep it all for themselves through 2020. It went really badly, but they get to keep it for themselves through 2020, and then after that, Smartmatic is free to sell it or market it or something to other jurisdictions. So that's one reason why it's a big deal. And the other reason why it's a big deal is that I have had concerns about sort of some jurisdictions that are under majority Republican control that have done things similar to what LA County has done. And it's been really difficult to get traction in Congress to stop it, because LA County seems to have a lot of sway with the Democrats in Congress. And so if they're doing it, it made it really difficult to complain that other places are. And by it, I'm referring to several things. In particular, a move away from paper voter lists to check-in voters at the polling place toward electronic poll books, which are considered extremely vulnerable and largely unregulated. And the second thing is a move away from hand-marked paper ballots to these, they call them universal use ballot marking devices. And so, that is again, that touch screen computer that functions as a hackable electronic pen.
Right.
So those are the two things, and it went really badly in LA County. It was disastrous on many fronts. They had massive lines between 2 and 4 hours long, and it appears the main chokehold was these electronic poll books. And again, those are like iPad is what they looked. I think they maybe literally were iPads that they used to check in the voters. They didn't have enough of them. They connect to the internet, which is concerning in terms of hacking and in terms of just, if you have a poor connection, they don't work. And I guess, I don't know that they were hacked, but they had poor connectivity.
These are used instead of just like a binder of paper voter lists.
Exactly. And the reason why this is something I had been harping on before Super Tuesday with LA County is they moved to these ginormous vote centers. So they had, I think they closed, from what I've read, I think they closed more than 3,000 polling places in favor of a much smaller number of vote centers. And the vote centers are so large that it made it, if not literally, and perhaps literally, but if not literally, virtually impossible to have paper voter lists even as a backup for these electronic poll books. And that's a huge problem, because even people who kind of like the electronic poll books, which are supposed to, in theory, make things more efficient, they all say you have to have a paper backup voter list in case they go down or you're screwed. And LA County, certainly they didn't have them. And I imagine they probably couldn't have them because the vote centers were so large. And that is a question I kept asking, whether it would even be possible. And I couldn't really get an answer. So the poll books failed on multiple levels. And the electronic ballot marking devices also had many problems as well. And I was able to track quite a few of these problems on social media. It was, really as close to a complete election meltdown as one could imagine. It went so much worse than I expected it to go. I was very concerned about it, but I did not expect it to go this badly.
Have you seen local coverage about it? Anybody covering it?
Yeah, in fact, Vox did a piece on it, which was kind of funny. They, I didn't speak to their reporter, but they actually cited I did a really long Twitter thread, threading together social media posts that I'd seen from voters relaying their experiences, and they quoted it and put it into their piece.
Very cool.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of local coverage on it. Hopefully it'll get national coverage too. I'm really worried though that, it's people aren't giving it its due, and they're focusing primarily on Texas, which had slightly longer lines.
Yeah, let's talk about
substantially longer.
Let's talk about Texas. What was that all about?
So Texas, whereas the lines in Los Angeles County ranged from between 2 and 4, and in a few cases, I think toward the end of the night, 5 hours long. In Texas, I think it was more common to see the 5 and 6 hour lines. That's my understanding. And so they were also really terrible. And there are some similarities between Texas and Los Angeles. I'm not a mind reader, so I'm not speaking of intent. I don't know if there were similarities in intent, and I don't know whether an intent was, benign or not in either place. But we also had a lot of poll closures in Texas in favor of, I believe, vote centers in some places. And you've also had, I believe, a move to electronic poll books and ballot marking devices. Those two things are really a major new trend that I am so afraid is not quite the word. I'm very, very concerned that we're playing Russian roulette with the general election. And because we're deploying really largely not previously used much new equipment, these electronic poll books instead of paper voter lists, and touchscreen ballot marking devices instead of hand-marked paper ballots. And we're really going to be deploying them for more or less the first or second time. There's the primaries in the 2020 election. And, it's setting us, when you play Russian roulette, it doesn't mean you're going to get a shot to the head, but there's that risk. And that it's just, I think we're taking a really unreasonable risk.
Wow. You're scaring me. I'm getting upset, but nonetheless, this is important for everybody to know. And so let's then talk about Georgia. What are the changes that have happened there? You're also paying attention to Georgia, and this is as a result of people probably may or may not know what happened in the 2018 election, right? With the gubernatorial election, you had Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp and all the shenanigans that were happening there. What's going on there?
Right. So in Georgia, what's on the bright side, there are things that voters can do to provide some degree of oversight. What's really problematic with what happened in LA County and what happened elsewhere is sometimes it can be really difficult to quantify how many voters were disenfranchised. The more poll workers you have and the more people making reports, you can start to quantify that. And if it ever comes down to a really close election, it's conceivable anyway that it might support an election challenge if you need one. So this is relevant to Georgia because there is a nonprofit called the Coalition for Good Governance that has done incredible work in Georgia, a lot of it in court. And one of the things that they did, which I don't believe the Abrams campaign did, but they did this for the lieutenant governor's race, was to look at the precinct totals, which come out on these long strips of paper, and they're posted outside the polling place on election night, and compare those to the reported totals. And they were able to identify, oh gosh, what was the number? I've posted it so many times and now I'm spacing. I want to say close to 100 and something thousand missing votes from predominantly
Yikes.
Black neighborhoods.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it almost supported an election challenge. The problem was that the margin of victory in that race was exceeded. It was something like the margin of victory was 200,000, and they found about 150,000 missing votes. So had they found another 50,000 more, it could have supported an election challenge. And depending on the state's law, it might have supported one anyway. It was a close call, I think. So ultimately it got thrown out of court, but it got a lot of much needed attention because at the time, Georgia had these paperless voting machines from a vendor. It was originally supplied by a vendor, Diebold Election Systems, which was previously called Global, whose largest shareholder had at one time been a convicted embezzler.
Yeah, you've written all about that.
So
it's
I've
really
written
worth
all about that. And so, yeah, but you need things like these stats to really get attention and really drive home the incredible risk that we're taking with these machines.
Well, this is just the beginning of a larger conversation with you, Jennifer Cohn. You can read her at the New York Review of Books. She's great on Twitter. Absolutely follow her on Twitter at Jenny Cohn, COHN1. It's great to see all the work you're doing, get to know it, and I appreciate you just giving us a little bit of a preview and recap of what happened. And we'll be talking to you, hopefully, a lot more throughout this election campaign and reading everything you're writing. Thanks a lot, Jenny, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. I would really like very much to talk again. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen. All right, that is it for the Post-Super Tuesday Spectacular. Thank you very much to all of my guests, Sarah Kendzior, Tim Wise, John Nichols, Brian Dominick, John Fugelsang, and Jenny Cohn. And thank you to all of the patrons with their paid subscriptions they wanted to plug. Dustin Barnett at TriSkill Promo. Get your custom branded clothing, bags, etc. from patron Dustin Barnett at TriSkill Promo. Patron Adam wanted to plug Tom and Leslie at Noble Pies. Patron Derek says the VMI Leader Journey Podcast. Check it out. Patron Jennifer M wanted to plug FBresearch.org. They promote the responsible ethical use of animals to advance biomedical research. That's FBresearch.org. Patron Dan Clark wants you to look up and support singer-songwriter Allie Moss on Patreon. Patron Matt Elliott wants you to know about and get the book Mitch, Please, How Mitch McConnell Sold Out Kentucky and America Too by Matt Jones and Chris Tomlin. That's it. We're out of time. Thank you very much for listening. On Friday's podcast, we will have Barry Ritholtz and Aaron Carroll with all of the health and economic fallout of a pandemic in America and worldwide. Check it out. Think for yourself. Look everything up. Tell me who you want to hear and be the change you want to see.